This is SoundNotion, the weekly podcast for new music and music news. I'm Patrick Gulo.
I'm Sam Merciers.
I'm Tim Rosenberg.
I'm Dave McDonald.
And on the episode this week, we are pleased to have pianist, writer, and all-around decent human being, Jeremy Denk. Thanks for being on the show, Jeremy.
My pleasure. I'll be as decent as I can at 10 in the morning.
And we'll be listening to an excerpt from Jeremy's recent album, the appropriately titled Ligeti Beethoven. We're eager to discuss the album, but first, Jeremy, it's the end of the concert season, but by looking at your upcoming performances, it doesn't seem that things have really calmed down for you as of late. Is that true?
That is sadly true, and I was just on vacation for a while, doing a working vacation, kind of, and I'm really looking at my rest of summer with a lot of trepidation and terror, and I don't know. But yes, I mean, summer festivals is a big time to go around, and unfortunately, it's also a time to meet all your friends and do all sorts of debauched things and hike, and generally visit, the beautiful parts of the United States. So it's a difficult time to keep focused.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate you getting up early on the West Coast to join us on your day off.
My pleasure.
Quite a sacrifice.
It's also Pride Parade Day in San Francisco.
Yeah,
so.
we just saw that. We're competing with their stream today, this morning. I don't think
Also
we're going to give them
City.
a run for their money.
When we're done here, I'm going to head straight out to see whatever happens at the end of where I'm sort of staying at the end of the line, so the parade is going to dissolve into my neighborhood.
Oh, great.
Maybe we'll hear a little noise from the parade bleeding in as the show progresses. That would be
In a very Ivesian fashion, that is
exactly what.
And certainly you're no stranger to Ives.
I am not a stranger to Ives. He and I have spent a lot of quality time together. I mean, yeah, almost too much. But once I started playing the Concord Sonata, people kept asking me to do it. So
you wrote a great piece for The New Yorker, I guess a couple of months ago now, was published about recording the Ives sonatas. And that's one of the reasons we wanted to talk to you is not only are you a really fantastic pianist, we really enjoy your recordings, but you're a really great writer. And you I think express things in a way that, of course, we're musicians on the panel, but also in a way that I think normal people can understand and really appreciate everything that you do in a way that I think is really hard for a lot of times for normal people to understand all of the things that we as musicians are doing to make music happen, to create these sounds. So I was wondering if you could just maybe talk about how you see your writing, both in outlets like The New Yorker and also on your personal blog, how that fits into your kind of music making life.
yeah, well, reading has always been kind of a big part of my life, and it's kind of a therapy or whatever. And so I see the writing as partly, as you can imagine, because, well, most of you are composers, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
All of us except for Tim, who's a closet composer.
Closeted composer. Well, you can come out anytime you want.
It's Pride Week, man.
It's Pride Week. I guess, it's so solitary playing the piano, and it's so obsessive and compulsive. And I have all these kind of thoughts that, naturally come out of practicing for hours and hours. And for some reason, I find writing, the act of translating the musical experience into words sometimes very calming and and it also inspires me from a different. It's like my other little devil on my other shoulder is suddenly speaking to me, and I'm able to get somewhere with the music that I maybe wouldn't if I was just obsessively practicing the whole time. So, it's just an outgrowth of I love books, I love reading, I love interesting prose, I love funny prose. I tried to make the New Yorker piece kind of funny to reflect some of the perversity of being a classical musician in the modern world.
I definitely like that part about.
It was much more harsher, much more insanely sarcastic piece when I started it. Yeah.
Well, you went through all those takes, and then you figured out the original take was the one you were going to incorporate into the album.
I mean, yes, that is a classic moment. When you enter that hall of mirrors in recording, because it's like looking at yourself in a million different takes, right? And you seem to recognize something great that you want in one take, but then the more you listen to it, the less fresh that inspiration seems, and so there's this horrible sense of, looking for a freshness through all this sort of pre-taped material, and there's such a contradiction there. And obviously, that's like the whole nightmare of recording. And that's why you have a producer around, of course, to sort of be the voice of sanity or the voice of the outside world as they might hear it. And, my interactions with him often are comic because when an insane person interacts with a sane person, then it's going to be funny sometimes.
Which is which?
I hope that it was clear in the piece that I considered myself mainly to be the insane person.
Yeah.
Okay, there are certain things that Adam, my wonderful producer, has to do to keep things going and everyone happy. And he kind of slightly errs on the side of making me feel good, like a handler would, and he's always like reassuring me and giving me lots of, extra compliments and, telling me maybe I need to take a little nap or a little downtime, and it's sort of infantilizing, at the same time, the whole recording process. Right. You regress back to a very early person. Yeah.
Well, from the perspective of a composer, if you recorded a bunch of versions and ended up using the first one, it's just that if you only recorded it once, you didn't torture yourself enough.
Right. Yeah.
You have to feel tortured, like it was a grueling process before you move on. So that's, at least in my experience, that's the way it is as a composer. So
right.
If you end up using the first one, you still got to try it 25 more times just so you suffer.
Yes, there's a certain level of suffering, and I think the producer wants to be safe. But there were a couple of the Ligeti études that we did in one take, and in some ways, I think much of the second movement of the Beethoven is in one take also, and it was the first take. And after that, somehow I couldn't put myself into that stream the same way the second time or the third time. And I can always tell when Adam is like, "Oh, that was great," but you can tell that it really wasn't as great. So.
Yeah, that piece really spoke to me because although I'm not a composer, I am a recording engineer and a performer, and so I was, you were speaking to me from both sides. The part where you mentioned that you wake up in the morning and you realize that you have to play this piece better than you've ever played it before. And then the part that you were just talking about where you're in the studio and having the artist there with you, picking their parts that they think are the best, and then realizing that it was really just the first one the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been on both sides of that, and it was really nice to have your words saying it, because you've said it better than I ever have. So anytime I do a project recording again, I'm just going to hand that article out to the artist first.
Good. I'm glad it came across that way, because when they asked me about this idea, I wasn't entirely thrilled, because I was like, well, everyone knows what a recording is like, but they're like, no, actually, people don't really know. And then I was like, it's not something you can even narrate. It's not a story, because it's like it's actually the most tedious imaginable.
Right.
Kind of thing. And so I started abstracting certain moments from the recording. It's like a recording is like an endless expanse of miserable time in which these recurring surreal tropes happen, right? And then he's like, well, yeah, okay, so put those tropes down. Let's hear what the things are that happen in the recording and make it into the narrative. And I was like, oh, well, okay. And I did. And I tried to tell it in a very honest, hopefully way.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to point out to people, that the creative process is often very, very boring. We watch reality shows that deal with creativity, and they make it seem very exciting. What's the art one? Is Work of Art? Is that a thing?
Work of Art.
Work of Art and Project Runway, And you see this, and they're always doing something for at least an hour minus commercial breaks.
Yes, right.
But I can't imagine, like, Sam's doing this 2-week composition thing, and I know there are other even faster composition contests like that where you just get like an afternoon or something. And I imagine what a reality show about that would be, and it would be the most boring thing I could possibly. I would never watch the show, and it's about my people, as one would say.
Yeah. Here's an exciting video of Sam reading the Wikipedia entry for Jig. And then here's Sam staring at the wall and thinking about it for 14 minutes. Yeah.
I was just reading that posthumous David Foster Wallace book about the Pale King or whatever it is, and it's about IRS agents. And there's some wonderful passages in there about boredom and tasks, and certain kinds of tasks that you do over time, and how much of a lie, the amount of crap that we see about making art or how you rehearse or practice, making music is one of the most ridiculously distorted things in the media because, most of the effort couldn't be filmed. Yeah.
Right. And it's really nice, as we've said, that you're showing people those things, because I really don't think that people do understand how boring the process really is to make this really exciting product. So thank you for sharing that with everyone in a way that was entertaining.
Good, I'm glad. Thank you.
So we appreciate that. And you mentioned, of course, your most recent recording project, Ligeti and Beethoven, which I've been listening to a lot over the last few weeks. I've always had a bit of a thing for the Ligeti études.
I don't know a composer friend who does not love the Ligeti études.
Right. If you are teaching somebody how to write for the piano, you give them the Ligeti études and say, write like that.
Well, as Jeremy, as you say in their liner notes, they're relatively new, but still considered classics. Would you say that's?
I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you that well at the moment. It could be that my computer is freaking out. Just 1 second. Yeah.
That's all right.
It happens.
It's not liking all. Is that better?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh.
We hear you fine.
Okay, good.
Patrick, you want to repeat your question?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, you had mentioned that the Ligeti études are rather new, but you can still consider them classics.
Uh-huh. Right.
And so, when did you really come to that realization?
When I first heard them in the early 90s, I heard a couple in Bloomington at a master class, and I thought immediately that this music was special and pianistic in a way that not much music is these days. And then, I noticed it was like required or optional anyway, étude for the opening round of tons of competitions, right? So already you have this kind of absorption of these études into the mainstream of piano competition world, which means that you're going to have lots of young kids practicing them. But I mean, it's music that everybody knows if you go to a conservatory or you talk to students, and
right.
It's not the same with Warren and something or other, or right. It's
right.
These pieces they're iconic and also partly maybe because they're so ridiculous. Like, how do you even imagine playing the first one?
Right.
For many years, I didn't even think I would bother to learn some of them because they seemed so preposterous, the amount of hours you would have to spend.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's one of those scores that you look at and your first reaction is to laugh. Like that's ridiculous.
Yes. Totally.
You know what I mean? Have you guys had this experience?
Oh yeah. Oh my God. Okay. Of course I have. Yeah. I play the saxophone.
But sometimes my name is on the score.
Right. I played all of your music, so yes.
That's the problem.
So I know you've talked about this before, Jeremy, but for people in our audience maybe who haven't been reading about this album, can you explain what you see as the connection between Ligeti and Beethoven? That seems, at least on the surface, to be a relatively unlikely pairing.
Uh-huh. Well, it happens to be, I mean, not entirely coincidentally, a pairing of pieces that I've spent a lot of time with over the last many years, which made them good for recording rather than a piece I don't know very well at all. But, as I talked about in the liner notes a little bit, for me, the kind of main connection is sort of a metaphorical one of explorations of the infinite, and almost a fractal-like explosion of ideas into complexity. And Beethoven, I mean, I think for me, the second movement of 111 is the most kind of amazing accomplishment of his late years, one of his greatest statements. And it's the way that he goes after this kind of timelessness, this sense of endlessness after all the push and pull of the first movement. And the way he does that using the rhythm and the kind of bizarreness of the rhythm and how it plays into that. And, in the sort of proto-jazz that emerges from his treatment of the rhythm, and this almost kind of dissolution of C major into a kind of endless cosmos of notes, and then the reconstruction of the theme from this kind of dissolved matrix. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I mean, especially hearing it, yeah.
Yeah, because the second movement begins with a very simple rhythmic idea, which is basically long, short, long, bum, ba, bum, and then there's a sense of enchaining that idea together, dim, bum, beam, beam, and then dim, ba, dim, ba, dim, ba, dum, ba, dim, and bum, ba, dum, ba, dum, ba, dum, ba, dum, and then it all dissolves into a continuity, and it's sort of a very long, drawn-out process of kind of mathematical dissolution or exponential, almost absurd. Following of the premise. Does that make any sense?
It's a kind of an obsession with those ideas that go into every little level, and every Schenkerian analysis professor is saying, "Yes, see, it's real."
Yeah. It's also like partly the mathematical oddity of what he arrives at, right? It's like 1232 or something like that, and then it's so amazingly moving when the theme returns out of that. As if discovered through only the most bizarre, wandering through the most bizarre places, can you come back to the simplicity of the original? And Ligeti, every one of the Ligeti etudes for me is like a little visit to infinity. They all begin with a premise, and they all kind of explode their premises into kind of unimagined complexities, or either they go off the top of the keyboard or the bottom keyboard, or they become insanely loud or insanely soft, or they become so convoluted in their rhythmic interplay that you can't even follow them anymore. So that's kind of the connection. The main connection for me is this infinity. Yeah. And following up the mania of Beethoven, late Beethoven, into the 20th century, which is maybe the first time that some consequences of late Beethoven could really be addressed again, taken up.
Yeah, and the ending of that Beethoven sonata in particular is really it's unusual in a really compelling way. How it just kind of trails off into nothing in a way that I just I'm not framing Beethoven correctly, but I wouldn't. That's not what I would guess for the ending of a Beethoven piece. I would think of something much more final.
Yeah, like you could compare that to the last movement of the Fifth Symphony, and you have a pretty serious distinction out end in C major.
Right.
So Beethoven had traveled a long way in his understanding of what an ending was, and obviously there's some element of sort of late in life transcendence. And what's kind of interesting to me is that, and you may find this interesting as composers also, Beethoven basically devoted his life to development, right, and obsessive civic, like the whole Western teleological deal. And then in the last sonatas, he barely has developments in his first movements, and he has tons of variations, which are kind of almost anti-developmental, or going for some sort of time outside of this sort of goal-oriented time that he's been setting up. Or in a way, he's kind of fusing his earlier narratives with this sense of timeless circularity, blah, blah, blah. So.
Yeah. No, and I think another connection that I'm drawing, and this is, I think, in part because of your performances of the Ligeti, is the counterpoint that's going on. It's really easy to listen to those Ligeti etudes and just hear fingers, 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 fingers.
Right.
But these recordings have just this amazing horizontal through line going throughout them, where you can not only hear a clear distinction of these different contrapuntal voices, but you can hear them moving melodically as you go along, and it's I think that as much as anything, and is making in my ears this connection between the Ligeti and the Beethoven.
Oh, fantastic! That is very nice of you to say. That's maybe the hardest and most elusive thing in the Ligeti etudes is to really sincerely live in the two rhythmic worlds and melodic worlds at once, and the two melodies sort of in their own meters, or 3 or 5 or how many there are.
Yeah.
in this, it's sort of like Bach fugue on incredible steroids.
I would say something even more recreational than steroids, perhaps.
Yes, often. Yes.
Yeah, for artists, you can just say performance-enhancing drugs, and then you can conclude what the drug might be on your own.
Yeah.
Insert your own joke here.
Speaking of steroids, how you mentioned the dynamics of the Ligeti, and they're pretty famous because they have those markings of 8 Ps or 8 Fs. How did you deal with that? As like you mentioned how many times you had to record several of these. Maybe those were ones that you just did in one take and said, okay, that was quiet enough or that was loud enough. But I just can't imagine the complexity of trying to, especially the quiet one, trying to make sure that you have all of the mechanics of the piano figured out.
Yes. Well, I was lucky in that I had a piano that I had a sort of dream-like, kind of desperate love relationship with. And particularly, those etudes are ridiculously demanding of the piano's mechanism. And you need to have a really light and brilliant action. You need to be able to go to the absolute extreme of kind of articulation, obviously. Like in the Zauberlehrling with the Sorcerer's Apprentice with all the repeated notes, you need this kind of ridiculous. But then at times you have to be able to play as softly and as kind of Debussyan, like mega Debussyan, like 8 Ps, and incredibly difficult configurations of things. So, I was lucky. I had the piano that I wanted, and then part of it is, of course, Adam, how you set up the mics, and we had a lot of conversations, blah blah blah, about what I wanted, how to make it.
Yeah.
So
how
you
to
feel the piano really.
What?
You feel the piano really gave you more artistic license in that sense.
Well, it was, this is always the huge, horrible thing about making a record is that, you have the piano, you play it in the basement of Steinway or wherever, you play it somewhere, and then you come on the day and the humidity is blah, 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 and then something goes awry and it moved it, and it's sort of not liking the new hall, or, things happen. Then you have to wait around while the technician deals with it. In this case, the piano behaved itself very well, and therefore there was a minimum of piano-related misery. Which was great.
Do you, as a pianist, I have my own instrument that I bring everywhere, but you have to use a new instrument every time. Is that something that you find frustrating in your line of? Yeah,
it's the worst thing. Yeah, it's very bad. And the worst thing for me, actually, the most typical, really horrible thing is you have a piano in your dressing room with one kind of action, and 2 minutes later you're out on stage on a piano on a stage with a completely different sort of action. Mm-hmm. And in the first few minutes of playing the concert, you have to somehow deal with your nerves in the moment and the music, and then also kind of negotiate this complete change of physics of the instrument, which I don't like very much. Old school, like, Liszt used to come out, and before his recital, he was just kind of warming up and improvising at the piano, and then suddenly the recital would start. I think that's a much more civilized. Now it's a very artificial situation where you have to sit backstage, biting your nails, and then suddenly go out. Usually there's a pre-concert talk at 7, and the doors open at 7:30, so you can't really even play on the piano for an hour before the. It's ridiculous, the obstacles and the miseries. So I'm always jealous of the people who can warm up backstage on their instruments.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you don't have to take it as carry-on on a plane, at least, though.
No, I have a lot less stress at the airport, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Jerry, I'm curious about your recordings So looking through your discography, and certainly the recordings of yours that I own copies of, they're all solo and chamber works. And I'm wondering how you balance your performance schedule between the smaller works and these big concertos. For example, you told us that you just played Liszt recently.
Right.
So how do you see the relationship between those, and how do you balance them in your own schedule?
I have no idea. Balancing my schedule is kind of a perpetual holy grail of my life that I have not yet found. I mean, I've spent a lot of time playing a lot of the chamber repertoire. I mean, at Marlborough or whatever, and festivals, and when I show up to play chamber music, sometimes it's sort of like seeing old friends again. And I've spent so many hours playing these pieces that I don't need to stress about them in a certain way.
Yeah.
Whereas very often the concertos, I've not spent as much time touring the Liszt E flat concerto. I've probably played the Franck quintet, for example, like 50 times, and certainly Dvorak in the upper hundreds of times.
Sure.
And at that point, a certain familiarity creeps in, and then the piece becomes so. It's just like a dialogue with an old friend, as I said. So balancing the practice time and also the sense of pianism that you need for Liszt. I'm playing the Dante Sonata a lot next year, and you have to be all cylinders firing for that. But I mean, I think the hardest one in a way that I did recently was that insane program with all the Ligeti Etudes books 1 and 2 on the first half, and then the Goldberg variations on the second half.
Oh my goodness!
I think took half of my life expectancy away. And I'm still...
I can't imagine.
The technique's so different, as you can imagine, and you wipe yourself out on those Ligetis, and then you have to come into this other world. On the other hand,
what do you do at intermission at that recital?
Just sit backstage.
Scotch.
Yeah, I should. I wish. You could play the Goldberg variations drunk, I would, totally. But no. I sit and I play Bach so that my fingers get in Bach mode. And I don't want the Goldbergs to sound like the Ligetis, particularly, except in certain, So it's tricky. I don't know how I balance it. With the writing is another thing, and I'm a little bit overwhelmed at the moment with various big projects. I'm doing hopefully a big writing project related to the Ojai Festival in a couple of years.
Oh, great.
And that has been. I was in sort of working vacation dealing with that, and it's going to be hopefully very, very funny and satirical. And I told my mom that, and she's like, "Is it like PDQ Bach?" And I'm like, "No, not quite."
Different kind of.
So, Jeremy, do you have any performances or writing that you're going to be publishing or anything like that coming up that you want to plug?
Yeah, where can we look forward?
Well, I'm playing University of Maryland in mid-July, I guess, with Ligeti Etudes, books 1 and 2. So if you're fans of Ligeti Beethoven and you're in the D.C. area, that's probably a good one to catch. The plug writing, I mean, I'm hopefully working on another piece for a major publication, and maybe 2 in the next few months. So if you're following big publications like the New Yorker or whatever, you may see another thing. But I think it's they're very cagey about these things, and you never know how they're going to work out. So you can't plug them until they exist.
Right.
And I mean, on my website, there's all the things that I'm doing over the summer. Santa Fe, and I'm playing the Schoenberg Concerto in Aspen, and blah blah blah. And I try not to use my blog for self-plugging in the way that my publicity people get really mad about. But I don't know, I'm really bored reading blogs about everything that people are doing, and I just prefer to put all that on my calendar, and hope that people go and look at it. Often there are post-mortems and like kind of miserable accounts of what happened or how I afterwards, or what horrible meal I was forced to consume, that kind of thing.
So you don't have any. So your goal for your writing is, you told us earlier that the writing is a personal thing for you to kind of work out ideas away from the piano a little bit. So it's interesting that you say that it's not for you to just plug your stuff, your concerts and recordings all the time.
Well, I don't find that kind of writing very interesting for the most part.
I don't think people that like your music do either, probably.
Right. And so it's not that I mean, I understand that as a purpose for the blog, and the same goes with Twitter, And I don't tweet very successfully in that way either. I don't know. I don't mention places. I'm not very good at that kind of. I would prefer to have a proxy do all that for me, I guess. And for me, the goal of my writing is to talk in a way, as you very nicely said, that helps to translate this music and give a sort of window into my vision of it, because I have such an intense relationship to this music, and I wish that a lot of people out there could have the same kind of intense, kind of terrifyingly desperate relationship to Beethoven or Ligeti or whatever. And so that's the goal. I mean, I as far as pure like careerist goals, there is also the mention of some sort of larger book idea, but again, that's all very cagey at the moment.
Yeah, and I think you're doing it absolutely right. I didn't mean to imply that you should be throwing in more plugs into your blog and into Twitter. But that I think that's what blogging and Twitter are really good at for musicians, is to make the personal connection with people on a different level, and get them to know you a little bit more. And in doing so, they will hopefully be intrinsically encouraged to just find the information about your CDs and your performances on their own, and of course, if they've found your blog, they know where to find that information anyway.
Yeah, I'm hoping that it works in that sort of subtle backdoor way.
I think that's more powerful.
I hope so. I mean, in the same, maybe that sounds disingenuous, but I mean, I didn't write the New Yorker piece to be an advertisement for my Ive CD, but we did sell a lot of CDs, which was lovely. But I
didn't mean it to sound cynical.
No, I know I don't think you're impugning any motives here. It's a complicated and this is very David Foster Wallace also, because, I'm sort of, the blog is sort of self-promoting, and obviously it's helped, people to come to know my particular whatever viewpoint, or, but it's deliberately kind of anti-self-promoting at the same time, which is a weird thing.
Yeah. Well, your blog is great in general, and we talked a while ago. We had talked a lot about the baseball metaphor that you had picked up.
Yes, I got really mad at David Lang about that.
Yeah,
but we made up later.
Oh, great!
That's good.
I don't know how you felt about the David Lang op-ed about. You remember that?
Yeah, I think about it on the show.
Yeah, we'll have to dial that show up again.
I can't remember
I think for me, my big beef was that their baseball and classical music serve different purposes. There's entertainment and art, and they're very closely related, but they're different concepts too. And so it's really hard to compare.
Right.
So, but we don't.
I got a little bit snippy, as you probably maybe remember. The image that I didn't like, as I remember, that I got really upset about, was like this image of us going out in old baseball uniforms, like recreating Dodgers from the 40s or whatever.
Yeah.
And that seems to be a very demeaning depiction of what we do as performers. And I was trying to, and I think I sort of rebutted with the idea that, first of all, we should be amazed and thankful. Of course, I'm fascinated to hear new music. I hope that comes across, and I'm desperately hopeful for new works and whatnot. But it is kind of also a miracle that this stuffy, stodgy music has survived a couple hundred years and changes in fashion. And then I sort of substituted in my metaphor was like we're Dr. Frankensteins trying to revive these corpses over and over again at night on the stage. Trying to sort of send some electricity through them and make them happen.
Yeah.
Well,
that makes it sound much more exciting than reenacting baseball games.
For me, it does. It was a little more gruesome, but
You know,
So how do you go about picking the next piece you're gonna tackle, or is this just something usually predetermined by the orchestra you're going to play with, or is it something that you have more control over?
With orchestra, sometimes there's a little dialogue. Sometimes it's like, we want you to play a Mozart concerto. We could pick which one. Sometimes it's just like, this is it. This is what we want to do, and will you do it? I mean, very often it's that they read a review of me playing it somewhere, and they decide he's played it and it wasn't a total disaster, and we'll have him.
I'm sure that's what they say. Well, it wasn't a total disaster, so I guess you can put it on the program.
And then, as far as recital programs, that's sort of more like my own interests and loves, kind of.
So it's just wherever. I mean, that's how it happens for me, and I just wonder. I always wonder for other people. Is it just whatever strikes your fancy at the moment?
You mean for recitals?
Well,
Yeah.
Well, with programming, the moment is a few years ahead. So
Yeah.
It's often a few years ahead. And I had, for instance, I mean, clearly, when I had my first solo recital in Zankel at Carnegie, I was strategizing what would be an interesting program that would sort of stand out as its own thing and would be also uniquely mine, a program that represented. And so the Concord on the first half and the Hammerklavier on the second half was kind of the natural choice. And it happened to coincide with some of my passions and interests. So there's a combination of pragmatism and, I mean, I want the piano recital, to be kind of more an event than like an outing.
Well, those two pieces are events for sure.
Really are. Let me tell you.
Well, shall we move on to a couple of stories?
Yeah. Jeremy, feel free to dive in on any of these if you have any thoughts about any of these topics that we're going to talk about.
Sure.
The first one is something that kind of blew up my Google Reader this week. Were responses to a seemingly innocent blog post by Emily White of All Songs Considered on the All Songs Considered blog. Emily White is a young person. She's, I think, 20 or 21. She's an intern at All Songs Considered, and she was talking about her financial relationship with the music in her collection. And she was saying that she's a music lover. She's worked in not classical music, but in radio stations. And she has a huge music library on her computer that's all digitized. But she says in her life she has bought only 15 CDs. And there was a huge backlash to this, calling her lots of terrible things because she had not purchased CDs for most of her library, the overwhelming majority of the music in her library. Notably, there was a very long response and very condescending response, I thought, from David Lowery, the tricordist, saying all sorts of nasty things about her and how, she needs to make sure that she's supporting these artists because this art's going to go away if people like her just keep stealing it. So I don't know. What do you guys think about this situation in this blog post?
I don't think she was so much advocating let's all download music illegally, but that this was the way it is, and it was the way for her when she was growing up. So, I mean, I think he was coming off, and our critics were coming off rather strong, as in the sense that they thought this was a call for everyone to download songs illegally.
Yeah, what gets me is that people will like to start the response in the tricordist. Emily, my intention here is not to shame you or embarrass you. Like, he's granting himself the moral high ground from the beginning, insinuating, I have power to shame or embarrass you because what you did is so wrong.
And then he goes on to shame and embarrass her for 4,000 words.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm glad this happened because it's always an opportunity for people to demonstrate their lack of understanding of a lot of the things involved in new media and new communications technologies, and their lack of understanding of what the quote free culture movement is about.
Right. So, let's talk about what the damage is. What is Emily White's damage and Emily White's friends' damage to the recording industry?
Can you explain what you mean?
Well, I'm kind of trying to start talking about what your blog post was about, in that you had said, it's impossible for us to gauge exactly if and what the recording industry has lost through file sharing, and there are other ways to publicize and bring music, especially independent artists, to the fore, more so than there ever has been before, without file sharing.
I mean, there are a lot of ways to support artists, and there are more and more ways being created on the web all the time, and most of these are legal. Piracy, I think, is kind of on the decline. And
I believe so.
And the peer-to-peer file sharing thing, she talks about using Kazaa in the 5th grade, which made me feel kind of old. Because Kazaa was like the third wave of file sharing for me. But to me, that's something that we're all getting beyond. And now that it has taken a while for the business side of the music creating ecosystem to get on board with new kinds of distribution and new kinds of business models. And at first it was very simple things like selling digital downloads of music that of course iTunes was the big explosion there. And since then we've had a lot of other online digital download retailers like Amazon and Google Play and eMusic and Bandcamp, and a lot of different things that all have slightly different twists on the digital sales. And then now we're seeing the next wave of digital distribution. We're seeing first things like Pandora to help discover new kinds of artists, and then maybe you'll want to go buy them. And then services like Mog and Rdio, which is dead to me, and Spotify, who are still, they're licensing this music legally from artists and letting people stream them for various fees / advertising, and they're compensating artists. Now, it's certainly fair to say that they're not compensating artists a lot. There's been a lot made of the extent to which especially smaller artists are compensated through sources like Spotify, and that's because Spotify has to make a separate deal with every single record label, and the record labels that have the biggest, the most clout, the artists that have the most clout get more of the revenue. But at the same time, I think there's a greater indirect benefit to the smaller artists. I have listened to things. I have a Spotify free account. I don't pay for any of the premium Spotify accounts, but I have many times streamed something from Spotify and then decided I wanted to go buy it and track down a place to have my own copy of it. And I think that's what most people do. In the blog post that Patrick you're talking about, I cited a study of Swiss entertainment audiences. In Switzerland, it is legal to do what we in most of the rest of the world would call piracy, to download media as long as you're using it for your own purposes. That's okay. And the Swiss government was considering revising this law, and they said, so there were these studies done, and they found that people that downloaded more music bought more music. People that downloaded more music illegally bought more music legally. So.
Now you can't. Right? But the crux of the matter is, you can't just condone someone saying, take this, download this music without paying for it. You can't make a blanket statement like that.
No, I wouldn't say that, and that's not what the free culture movement is about. The free culture movement is about artists choosing to make those things available for people to do what they want with them. It's not as Lessig and others would say, free as in free beer, as much as it is free as in free speech.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Jeremy, were you going to say something?
Well, I don't want to say anything, partly because I have no direct knowledge of the business of recording, other than my own anecdotal knowledge, which is having lost a terrific sum of money on my Ives record, and then having gotten a very small honorarium for my None Such record, which I was even surprised to receive. And so, both of those records represent a huge net negative in a way of my
Right.
financial status,
as classical albums tend to do sometimes.
Yeah, exactly, right. And that's it's. I have to say, I get upset about it. I mean,
Yeah. Well, that's a
the
legitimate-
investment of time and stress and love that went into those records, and it does upset me when people think they can just download them or copy them, or I don't know.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, and I get that. And I totally agree with that. But I don't think that people are downloading, at least anymore. At one point, this was the case, but I think that the vast majority of people that are downloading music illegally or copying music illegally, she's saying that a lot of this is stuff that she just got from friends and family. They're not doing it instead of buying it. If they didn't do it that way, they just wouldn't listen to it.
Right.
And I think that's a big thing to remember. And another thing that I think before we leave this topic to remember is that she's not in this article, nor in most of the responses are we talking about classical music. Classical music is kind of universally a money-losing proposition, especially when it comes to recording.
And
right?
it's impossible to find, contemporary music. You can't really find pirated copies of that music.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a moot point as far as that kind of downloading goes. One thing I would like to touch on. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
For that reason, I thought it was very kind of amazing of Bob Hurwitz at Nonesuch to go forward with this ridiculous, what I call the makeout album of Ligeti and Beethoven. And there's like, what's the market for that? But whatever. There's kind of a debate that goes on, and I'm grateful for it. So
I think they really get the people up and dancing in the clubs.
Yeah.
Yeah, a big thing I would like, was his name Lowry?
David Lowry.
David Lowry to understand is that the free culture movement is not about not enforcing copyright.
Yeah, right.
Not at all. And he seems to think that's what it is, which says to me he didn't do his homework and doesn't have any idea what he's talking about. Free culture is about not just artists being able to choose what kind of protections they want on their work, but also basically pulling back on some of the out-of-control copyright laws that have been put in place over the last 25 years. Making it so that and I've made this argument 100 times and everybody else knows it, but Walt Disney lobbying to make it impossible for people to do now exactly what they did and hit it big with when they were in their infancy.
Yeah.
Use material that is not, like, for us to use material now, it has to be so old that it has no connection to contemporary or has minimal connection to contemporary culture, and that wasn't the case when Walt Disney was starting out.
Sure.
And the copy, and all this stuff about copyright and protecting artists and all that stuff, having copyright be 120 years or whatever it is now doesn't make the artist any more money. It makes media conglomerates more money.
I think it's the death of the composer or the creator plus 75 years.
Yeah,
or something.
Which is ridiculous.
100 years.
It's 100 now?
Yeah, they just changed it to 100 years.
Oh,
yeah.
Lord.
Which is
Because people are living longer, Dave.
Well, no, this is measured after the person dies.
Okay.
The clock on that 100 years doesn't even start until the person dies.
Wow.
Yes.
So it's a little bit ridiculous. And if you're playing the SoundNotion drinking game, that's one drink for Lawrence Lessig reference. That kind of dovetails into another blog post that we had in the list this week about classical radio. There's a blog over in Drew McManus's Inside the Arts about classical music radio. Is an occasional, not the most what's the word I'm looking for? Not the most what am I trying to say here?
I don't know. What are you trying to say here,
This
Dave?
blog isn't updated very often, but every once in a while it is, and it's pretty interesting. Scanning the Dial. It's about classical music and broadcasting. And they talk about kind of changing the way royalty structures work for classical radio stations and how this is a discussion that's being had a lot more in popular music, but it's something that classical music has to deal with as well, is how to deal with other kinds of streaming. And it's a problem that we have, and this kind of goes along with what we were saying about piracy, that we try to apply all of these laws that we've had on the books for decades that have dealt exclusively with one kind of media, whether that's over-the-air broadcast or physical copies of recordings, and we try to apply them to digital streams and digital downloads, and it doesn't always make sense. And there are a lot of things that are going to have to change for this to make sense for more people to get into the business of these streaming services or these digital download services. This article says last year Pandora paid 54% of its income in royalty payments, and that's because they have to work basically within the same rules as broadcast radio, which doesn't necessarily make sense, because when I broadcast radio signals, if I had a antenna on the roof of the house, anybody that lived within that radius could hear it. But with Pandora, they know exactly how many times that has been played and who has listened to it. And so we don't really have a good way of dealing with things like web streaming. We can't play most of the music that we listen to, especially on our show, Streamers and Punches, which listens to a lot of high-budget film music. It's a show about film music, if you're interested. And every time we put something in and slap the show on YouTube, it gets a DMCA takedown notice through a computer, because the computer doesn't know anything about fair use, and we can't really license it in any reasonable way for our size of audience.
And you're only broadcasting what, like a 10-second clip or something?
30 to 60 seconds, but it's still fair use. But even if it wasn't, even if we wanted to license it, what I'm saying is we wouldn't have a reasonable way to do it for our size outfit.
Right. There's no mechanism for SoundNotion TV to do that.
I think once again, Lawrence Lessig makes a great analogy. Makes a great analogy in saying, comparing the way one would write a paper. Like, if I wanted to quote Jeremy, his blog or a New Yorker article or anything else, I can quote a huge chunk of it in a paper I'm writing, and all I got to do is put a footnote.
Yeah.
That's all it costs me. And there is no mechanism for doing that with newer media and new communication technologies whatsoever.
Right.
So YouTube responds immediately to 10 seconds of something that I would be willing to bet my life is not going to cost, John Williams is not going to lose a sale for his new score because somebody already got to hear 10 seconds of it on Streamers and Punches.
Right.
It might inspire a purchase. The system is just backwards, and I don't know.
Yeah, nobody's going to Streamers and Punches on YouTube and scanning to 32 minutes and 17 seconds in to the podcast to listen to 30 seconds of the Avengers score instead of buying the Avengers score, right?
Yeah.
So
just this fierce protectionist thing that the big media outlets just don't want to let go of is going to have to go. And that's a big point that Lessig makes, is that people are going to continue doing it the way they're doing it, and nothing is going to stop them. So you might as well, like Lowry makes the argument that, we can't bend our morals to suit the technology. Well, if you want to voice it that way, I think you do have to bend your morals to suit the technology, because people are not going to stop getting their hands on music in the most convenient way. Like, I watch videos of television shows I love, and I do it illegally. But as soon as I have a problem finding one, and I can't make it work, I go to Amazon Video, and I'm like, oh, look, I can stream it automatically, and it's only $2.99. Well, I spend $2.99. It's not like all the watching stuff illegally I've done made me. I'm never going to pay Amazon $2.99. More likely, the practice of getting to watch a television show whenever I want has gotten me addicted to it. And the one time I can't find a copy that I want, I go and buy it. And then I'm like, oh, that's really high quality video. Maybe I'll just start spending $2.99 every time, which has happened on shows that are worth the $2.99.
So the moral of the story is you have to make television that is worth at least $2.99 to Sam Sears.
Yeah,
we should hit these quick stories and get to the pick.
Friend of the show, Missy Mazzoli has been named composer in residence with the Opera Company of Pittsburgh. Is it Pittsburgh?
Philadelphia.
Right? One of those peak places.
Boo.
That was bad. Wow.
Opera Company of Philadelphia, and there's not much to say other than that's happened. And I, knowing quite a bit of Missy's music, cannot wait to hear what comes of this partnership.
Well, I heard her opera that was just premiered a couple months ago in New York, and it was really quite good.
What was it about? Can you refresh?
It was about it's kind of like a power to the woman.
Oh yeah.
I forget what the exact title was. It had the
Called
person's
Song
name.
from the Uproar.
Songs from the Uproar. Yeah, and I believe it's supposed to be part of a series of operas she's going to be doing on a number of people, and this just happened to be. So, Tim, do you have the exact name of the person who?
It doesn't say. It just said the
This one
premiered.
it has a God, I can't remember the person's name. Isabel Eberhardt, The Lives and Deaths of Isabel Eberhardt.
Cool.
It was really good.
Looking
I'm a
forward
fan of her work, and I'm delighted to see. I'm glad to see operas being written. I have a whole raft of weird thoughts about contemporary opera and opera in English and opera as a genre.
Let's hear a little of it.
It's less a raft of thoughts than kind of a rant. I often think that when I hear opera in English, especially modern opera in English, I'm like, this sounds ridiculous. I mean, why are they singing? Why are they singing? I don't understand any of this, and it sounds so stilted. And it seems to me there has to be a solution to modern vernacular text declamation that will sound like it makes sense to a modern audience, and yet could still fit within the genre of what you may call an opera, but it might not resemble an opera as we understand it, and blah 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 like that.
What could help? Don't sing in bel canto style.
Yes,
I'm telling you, if you sing English bel canto English, it sounds weird, and if you sing
it
like
often does. Yeah,
and if you sing in just for lack of a better description, a pop voice.
Are you saying we should Broadway-ize opera?
Broadway eyes? No, because Broadway kind of, you hear a lot of personality in opera voices and in Broadway voices, but Broadway still has that sort of, like Tom York would never sing on Broadway because his voice isn't, quote, good enough, you know what I mean? But to me, a voice like that, or to take another example, Bjork, as she gets older, her voice gets a little more shredded. To me, that's just adding interest. If you make music that needs to be sung with correct pitch, then if you sing correct pitch, that's the only requirement. Everything else is just color. Of course, I'm sure lots of people wouldn't agree with that point of view.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of people like bel canto. So.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a tough genre, and I guess it has a certain prestige or whatever. But it does seem to me that if you're going to write an opera, these days, you have to kind of reimagine what an opera is supposed to be, and don't paint by numbers.
Right. Which is all going to say, Missy, we have some really high expectations. So don't.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. We had a story here a while ago about Rob Deemer had written that in his interviews with all these composers, one thing that he found that almost all of them wanted to do was write an opera. And I hypothesized that the reason that all these people want to write opera is because they all kind of have their own definition of what opera is. They all were kind of like expanding our definition to be a lot more inclusive of what opera can be. And I think everybody's kind of pushing out on the fringe of that. And everybody wants to write an opera, but not everybody wants to write the same kind of opera.
Right. So, I'm told by a friend of the show, Ricardo Lorenz, that my film projects are opera. They don't seem very opera to me, but I'm sure he knows better.
David Smook premiered an opera last year that was in a cafe with string quartet. So
yeah, and the text was something. What was it?
Yeah, that was weird. I remember talking about that.
I remember seeing a video clip of it, and it was.
I was
people
there. It was in William
Opera Monthly would probably not think it was very.
Wasn't Wasn't the text like complete nonsense?
Yeah, but it was nonsense drawn from somewhere. I can't remember.
It was like a constructed language. That's what it was.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
How is it any more nonsensical than any other opera, though? I mean, get started on your understanding of nonsense.
I mean, if you don't speak German or Italian, it's nonsense to you anyway, right?
Yeah, and
Go ahead.
I mean, Don Giovanni, as great as it is, half of it feels like textual nonsense, right? I mean, or plot nonsense, or
Well,
so nonsense is built into the structure of opera, which is very important.
Well, even for Mozart, I mean, if you have a song that's talking about how many women you've slept with, I don't know, that's pretty nonsensical, I guess.
That's my favorite number, though. So that's
It is mine too.
Yeah. But just thinking about that one, that's a very odd coincidence.
Sam, you want to do the obit and we can get out?
Oh, we're skipping everything else? Come on, we got to at least mention them.
Okay, fine. There's only one thing.
The Ravel
BBC is not cutting its funding to its performing groups the way a lot of other places in Europe have been. So, like, smaller orchestras that service more rural areas aren't getting the acts the way they are in Germany. Deceptive Cadence blog has a piece about how kids pick instruments, and I love the Deceptive Cadence blog usually, but this one is completely ridiculous because they don't mention anything about all they
Sam,
talk
you know
about.
what I like about you is how diplomatic you are when you disagree with people.
It's ridiculous because they only mention band and orchestra instruments, and then they make the point that kids are inspired to play by what they listen to. Well, not many kids listen to oboe sonatas. A lot of them listen to music made by turntables and laptops and computer software, and they don't mention.
Oh.
It's sort of like they're assuming that if a kid is going to learn how to play an instrument, the only instruments that they have to choose from are band and orchestra instruments, and
recorder.
And there's all kinds of other musical possibilities for kids these days that they just completely disregard as if they don't exist. So shame on you, Deceptive Cadence blog.
Well, I would blame From the Top.
Yeah, and yeah, we won't even get into that. But
I'm not gonna get into my From the Top beef.
I have
a beef with From the Top.
Dave hates From the Top.
I'm not going to talk about From the Top. I'll stay completely out of it.
Yeah, me too.
Partly because I've never even seen, or I don't really know From the Top.
It's a show where they.
I know what it is,
okay.
but I've never witnessed the actual thing. So
yeah, I haven't either, but I know everything I need to know about it.
I like it just because the guy that runs it did the Radiohead piano album, which is cool.
Yes, yeah.
All right.
I haven't heard that either, even though that's a completely idiotic thing for me to neglect, but I haven't.
Well, the only downside is he wears a completely ridiculous tuxedo in concert, too, though. What's his name?
Outfits in concerts are a whole terrible neurosis of mine, and I went through.
Let's get into this. I'm ready.
This is Tim's pet topic.
Yeah.
Well, this is a tough one for me because I don't want to. I was explaining yesterday to my friend who was trying to encourage me maybe to go a little wilder. I was like, there's a line between sort of quirky and like Vegas on stage. There's like,
and
that's a very dangerous place. You have to sort of. And dress shirts like a dress, I mean, it so quickly goes over the line to ridiculous. And it's very hard to find the sort of classy, unusual outfit choice that's also comfortable, that won't have sweat stains, that won't make you look. I mean, there's so many problems.
What's wrong?
No one sympathizes with our.
What's wrong with a tuxedo or a nice suit? I'm sure you'll look fantastic.
A suit is boring, I find. But I mean, I thought Leif Ove Ansnes looked great in a suit the other day. So, if you could rock it a certain way, yes. Yeah.
So something between Tails and Han Ben. Somewhere.
Yeah, I think Han Ben is taking it pretty far, but it's his artistic journey.
Right.
So, Sam, you want to clear this up?
And lastly today, Richard Adler, who wrote some for Broadway, and he wrote symphonic works and stuff like that too, died this week at 90, probably most well known for Pajama Game, The Pajama Game, but also what I heard the story at NPR, and something very interesting to me is everyone knows the famous Happy Birthday rendition by Marilyn Monroe was actually a fundraiser at Madison Square Garden, and Adler was the producer. So that cultural, that sort of, cultural signpost that everybody knows about, Marilyn Monroe singing Happy Birthday to the president, we have Richard Adler to thank for that. So, so long, Richard Adler, rest in peace.
How many times did you almost say Samuel Adler?
Which is funny because, I've got it. Oh, if my camera is sitting on my Adler organization book. Because I'm like, can a violin play that note on that string? Oh, yeah. Okay. All right.
So I think it's time.
The pick of the week.
The pick of the week this week is from Jeremy Denk, our guest's new CD of Ligeti's piano études and the last Beethoven sonata. We are, I think, going to listen to which one was it that you wanted to listen to, Tim?
I wanted 13, Devil's Staircase.
Oh, okay. So,
Great.
Jeremy, do you have anything that you want to say to maybe introduce this Ligeti étude?
Well, Devil's Staircase. Well, it's awesome. It's a mathematical term. I didn't really realize that. I interpreted it in poetic terms when I first heard it. But it's a term for a certain kind. And now I've even forgotten what it is. But you can look it up on Wikipedia, and obviously it's a piece about continuous rising and mania, and very simple groupings of threes and twos. Really, not much to it, but. And the pitch material is very simple in a certain way too, but it has an incredible effect, I think.
All right, so here we go. This is the Devil's Staircase from Jeremy Denk's new CD of Ligeti and Beethoven. So that is a short excerpt from Jeremy Denk's new CD of Ligeti piano études and Beethoven sonatas.
It's fun to write music that's that hard and knowing that somebody's going to be able to pull it off. I've only gotten to write something that's that kind of frenetic and crazy once. The piece I wrote for Eric Lau. Recently got tenure at the University of New Mexico.
Oh, wow.
For him.
Yeah. Anyway, I wrote a piece with just ridiculous technique, and he played it ridiculously well. Just like just then.
You're talking about the ridiculous technique of the foot?
Well, that was part of it.
Yeah, that piece is hard.
It reminds me a lot of kind of the aural. Is it called Jacob's Ladder? That aural illusion of a pitch that's continuing to ascend forever and never finishes. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
So that's what I think of when I hear that. It's a really interesting continuation, and it just keeps going up like that for the whole etude. So but then on the smaller scale, you keep hearing these smaller little steps going down within the overall rise.
Yes.
Again, going back to that counterpoint idea.
Yeah.
I like the idea that it's called the Devil's Staircase and there is an overall rise.
Yes. Here's the Wikipedia. In mathematics, the Cantor function is an example of a function that is continuous but not absolutely continuous. It's also referred. Then I could read all the algebraic, but I think it might get a little.
That's good radio.
It's good. It's great radio. I'm sure. But the thing about that piece is that's the one with the 8 Fs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what
And-
do you do for 8 Fs?
I don't know. You just go and whatever happens.
Does
you
it
know?
ever hurt?
Yeah, that piece hurts a little bit. Yeah, And it's tiring mainly. Right?
Yeah.
But it's also got a kind of listy and it fits in the hand a lot better than some of the others. So it actually feels pretty good to play it.
That's interesting. It doesn't it's the sound is so aggressive it's hard to imagine it like feeling comfortable.
It fits. It works. I mean, it's much easier in a way than Disorder or even. I mean, Vertige and Disorder are probably the most ridiculously unplayable ones. And this one is again Liszt or I think Liszt is I think Ligeti would have hated that, but there's something about the demonic and his control of the sound of the piano that sounds very Lisztian to me.
Yeah.
I think I like this one. That's why I picked it because the way it reminds me of improvisation out of somebody like Thelonious Monk or even Brad Mehldau nowadays. But Thelonious Monk really comes to mind, given the harmonies and the way it just kind of grooves endlessly.
Yeah. Its groove is really interesting because it's like 3-3. How does it work? 2-2-2-3 2-2-3. 2-2-2-3 2-2-2-2-3. It's like it's sort of constantly telescoping into short groups of 2 and 3s and then out to large groups of 2s and 3s. It's continuously kind of googly eyeing like that, and that gives it that sort of symmetrical, asymmetrical, weird mix. And it has some great little jazzy solos that happen over the ostinato later, right? And sort of when he writes capriccioso and kind of like a little bit of. Obviously, it's supposed to be demonic, but occasionally it's also a little bit funny and I guess with a smirk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The amazing thing to me about these Ligeti pieces is it seems like, in my experience anyway, like your jaded composers who only like weird, ugly music, that music is not weird or ugly enough for me, tend to like this music. And people who are into like pretty music also like this music.
Yeah.
And that's no small feat, in at least in my experience.
I think it's a difficult set of dual. Yes, it's two very different demographics to please, and I think it's interesting that Ligeti didn't write that much music, and he really obsessed about finding that spot in which the music has a certain integrity, but it's still accessible. It's accessible and yet completely abstruse and uncompromising in another way. It's a very unusual mix of those two elements, to me.
No, I think that's maybe a good place to end it. We're already running pretty long this morning. Thank you so much for joining us, Jeremy. It's been really great talking to you.
My pleasure. Likewise. I hope I didn't blab too much.
No, not at all.
Okay, good.
So thanks a lot. It was great having you on.
Great.
And we're gonna, of course, have links in our show notes to Jeremy's site and his blog and his Twitter and all those good things. So
and where you can buy the album.
And where you can buy the album that we just talked about. So you should definitely do all of those things and keep up with what he's doing because it's very compelling stuff. To read about any of the stories that we talked about this week, or to comment on the show, you can do that on our site, soundnotion.tv/SN, and leave us a note. We do this show live, of course, every Sunday morning, usually at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. So if you'd like to watch us live and give us your comments while we're doing the show, you can do that at soundnotion.tv/live. You can also connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. We're at SoundNotion on Twitter. We're also all individually on Twitter. This show and all our shows are available in the iTunes store, so be sure to go there and subscribe for free to catch every episode. SoundNotion's introduction includes music by Patrick Gulo and video by Tyler Lepp. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next week.